this thing came on the market, and I wasn't expecting it.
Right.
I wasn't expecting it. Now, I had a bit of a chat to my wife and said, what do you think? And she says, well, what's your view? And I said, I've been wanting one of these ever since I was a kid, And I said, it's well priced. What do you think? And she said, oh, well, you might as well.
Yeah.
So we bit the bullet, we bought it, and then we started the restoration process on it.
So have you had any sort of relationship with Chargers over the years?
Yes, I have. When I was 12, Dad bought one of these cars.
Right.
In fact, it's almost the same, except for he had a vitamin C one.
Okay.
And I fell in love with that car, and we had it for 6 months, and it got stolen.
Oh, no.
And I remember I was brokenhearted when I found out that it was stolen. Dad was too, but I was too young to understand.
Right.
And he never bought another muscle car after that.
Oh,
and
is
he
that
just
right?
bought normal sedans.
Oh, no. No wonder you missed it. Unfinished business there.
Oh, yeah. So he actually went from this to an Alpha Sud.
Oh, okay.
It was a
Righto.
1.2 litre little
talk
buzz
about
box.
chalk and cheese. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And back in the day when we had this thing, it was just phenomenal.
Yeah.
Like, I remember Mum had to drive it.
Right.
Because this was the family car.
Yeah.
And she was very nervous because it was loud and brash. And I remember we used to go around the block with her. I'd get home from school, I'd go, come on, Mum, let's practice driving. And we'd drive around the block. And it was amazing. It was good times. And ever since we had that car, my view was, I'd love to get another one.
Yeah. Yeah.
But, family, getting married, work gets in the way. And then this thing just came up out of the blue. And I'd been collecting photos and reports and that. So I knew enough about them to do something with them.
Yeah.
But I'm not a mechanic by trade.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty handy, but, common sense handy, so to speak. And I got this and then made a few phone calls and found a couple of people. Got burnt along the way, as everyone does when they do restorations.
Yeah.
But then ultimately I found an amazing gentleman by the name of Des. And he used to operate specialty paintworks down the Gold Coast.
Okay.
And he was recommended from a friend through a friend.
Right.
And I basically pulled the engine out of the car, pulled the gearbox out, and delivered it to him.
Right.
And he did everything.
Right. Okay.
So what you see today is what he did.
Right. Okay.
And it was just phenomenal. He spent, it was with him for 3.5 years.
Okay. Yeah.
The biggest issue was he actually had to close his shop halfway through the restoration process. So I started to sweat bullets. Thinking,
of course.
What's going to happen? Am I going to get the car back? Because it was in a million pieces.
Right.
And he said to me, Phil, if you trust me, I'll take it home and I'll finish it at home.
Okay.
And I didn't know what to do.
Yeah,
I really didn't.
yeah.
And I thought, well, damned if you do, damned if you don't.
Yeah.
So I asked him to show me where he lives. I went and had a look. The place looked secure enough.
Yeah.
And I said, okay.
Right.
And to his credit, he finished it.
Right.
He ended up getting a job near the end of the process, so he was able to use a proper spray booth.
Yeah,
so he got back into the paint and panel business.
Yeah.
And he finished it off for me, to his credit.
Right.
And so this is what you see here before you today.
Now, looking at the photos you sent me, it looked like a full-on job.
Oh, it was every nut and bolt.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Did it have much rust? That's one thing I couldn't really pick.
No, actually, the car was quite sound. It only had a bit of rust in the A-pillar on your side.
Yeah.
And that rear quarter had some rust in it.
Yeah.
And inside the wheel arches, the rear wheel arches at the front, those two sides were rusted.
Okay.
Apart from that, the car was fine.
Not bad. Yeah.
It had a bit of some of the panels weren't the best.
Yeah.
And we actually replaced that door.
Right.
And this front guard.
Okay.
Because they had too many creases in them. And the panel beater said to me, he said, look, if you can pick up a replacement panel for less than, he said, back in those days, he says $200.
Right.
He says, you're better off. He said, because by the time I panel beat them out.
Yeah.
So that's what we did.
Okay.
And along the way, I met a gentleman by the name of Glenn Kiernan.
Yeah.
And we're now really good mates. And what he doesn't know about Chargers, there's no one around that I would know any more than him.
Right.
And he really helped me with finishing the car to the detail that it is today.
Right.
And so, I owe a lot to him.
So you've clearly got a bee in your bonnet. This thing's got to look right.
Oh, look, the funny thing is, what happened is it was meant to be a general restoration.
Yes.
Right?
Okay.
And then Des, to his credit, he rang me up one day and he said, by the way, Phil, he said, I've noticed that the your guard bolts are different.
Right.
He said, if we're going to do this right, I want the right ones. And I went, seriously? He said, well, we've got to do it right. So that's when it started.
Okay.
So from that request, we then thought, well, okay, well, if this is what we're going to do. And I said, well, what else do you need?
Right.
And he said, look, there's a few other bits and pieces that aren't right. And that's when I ran into Glenn. And his expertise was just seriously unbelievable. Like, he was able to give me the correct colours, the codes, parts if we needed them. He sourced so many parts that were hard to get, especially for this particular model.
Yeah. So motor and gearbox.
Okay. Gearbox had been recently rebuilt.
Right. Okay.
But what we did is we pulled the top off it, inspected it, and it was pristine. It was in really good nick. And it was the guy who sold it to me was legitimate in saying that he had it rebuilt.
Yeah. So 4-speed in these, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah. And these were the first 4-speed. A lot of people ask me why there's a 4 on the hockey stripe, because this was the first 4-speed Chrysler ever made in Australia.
Right. Okay.
So the box is pristine.
Yeah.
The diff I haven't touched, but the diff was replaced a few years back, and it seems there's no whining, no crazy noises, so it seems fine. The engine, the engine initially was given a freshen up,
Right.
and that's when I learnt my first big lesson. It needed more than that, but I didn't know.
Right.
So the money I spent doing that was basically down the toilet.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because 2 months after it was on the road, it broke a rocker.
Oh, bugger. Okay. Yeah.
So I took it to a creditable mechanic. He looked at it and he said, Phil, he said, this engine's really sick. I said, you serious? He said, yep. He says, it needs to be rebuilt. And I said, but I've just spent, back in those days, $2,000 to get it rebuilt.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
So we stripped it and totally rebuilt it.
Right. Okay.
Look, I couldn't even tell you the cost, but it was in excess of $20,000 at the end of the day, because we went for, try to get original parts back in it.
Right.
The biggest thing, but surprisingly enough, were the pistons.
Oh, okay.
Through Glenn,
Yeah.
I was able to track down a company in America that makes reproduction 6-pack pistons.
Oh, really?
And the story behind that is that Glenn told me that many, many years ago, a group of 6-pack owners, that's what these cars were nicknamed 6-packs, because they've got the three twin throat Webers.
Yeah.
They got together and they sent a sample piston to the States and said, make one up.
Right.
And put it on file. And they got a couple of sets made up. And they actually put a secret code on it.
Oh.
So no one would know what it is. Now, and the code specifically is, it refers to a Holden model. I won't tell you which one.
Okay. Right.
So when I had to order the pistons, Glenn said, this is who you contact and this is the model that you want. And I said, but hang on, it's a Holden. He says, trust me, this is the one.
It's almost secret handshake, isn't it?
It was. And the pistons are identical reproductions of the originals.
Right.
But they're made in very light alloy.
Okay.
So we took the original conrods out and put H-beams in it.
Yeah.
The original crank was shot pinned and balanced. It's got the twin plate clutch in it, which a lot of people take out. When they came from the factory, they had 3 bolt connectors for the whole twin plate clutch system.
Right. Okay.
And a thing they called tongues, and I didn't understand what they were talking about. So when they pulled this one out, they said, hey, this has been modified to 6 bolts.
Right.
And it's got 3 additional tongues in it. And I said, I said, is that good or bad? And he says, actually, that's good. He said, because it makes them a lot more solid. Instead of 3 bolts, you've got 6 bolts hanging on and the extra tongues. So it's got the original modified clutch housing, but brand new plates.
Okay.
And the clutch is amazingly light.
Right. Okay.
But at idle, it rattles like a truck.
Okay.
It sounds as if something's loose. So when you're sitting in traffic and you hear all this rattling going on. So that was with that. But like I said, the engine was probably the biggest. The carbies were fine. They just had to be rebalanced and cleaned.
Right.
Extractors, that's the next one. What happens with these is the flanges are quite rare.
Right.
So what they did, and what a lot of people did in the day, is they cut the flanges off and made new pipes.
Okay.
So this had new pipes put on it. and they were pretty sad.
Right.
But I didn't know at the time.
Yeah.
So I had them ceramic coated in white
Yep.
because they look white when you look at them. And after the second rebuild, Glenn said to me, he said, those extractors, he said, like, they got the right flanges, but they do look a bit rough. And I said, well, what can we do? And he says, well, they're making reproduction ones now.
Right. Okay.
So I bought a set of reproduction ones,
Yeah.
which, mind you, are really hard to get now.
Yeah.
But they come with a special aluminium coating, which makes them look white.
Okay.
So I sold my other set and put these ones on. And during the rebuild process, I made the mechanics wear gloves,
Right.
white gloves, when they put the extractors on.
Okay.
Because any hand marks left on
Yeah.
them, if there's any grease and you fire it up and they warm up, it stains and that's there forever.
Right.
And the most, believe it or not, when we had to do the engine rebuild, the most stressful thing for me was not the engine rebuild, but putting the extractors back on. And I was actually there watching them and holding them and making sure that they didn't put their greasy mitts on it. The only thing that I've detracted from original is the stripes are meant to be a satin,
Yep.
but these are gloss.
Okay.
I
Yeah.
wanted them gloss because the car's been cleared.
Yeah.
It's just for maintenance.
Yeah,
It's just to
yeah.
keep them clean.
Well, I think you're over 18, aren't you? You're
I
allowed,
think
allowed
so.
to make these decisions.
I think so. I think so.